Welcome to Behind the Curtain, where we discuss everything from aliens and conspiracies to ancient civilizations and religions, all from a biblical perspective.
Welcome back, everyone. Today, as promised, is part 2 of Spirits in Prison. We continue our conversation on the Book of Enoch and other religions and cultures that Israel would have encountered, and what they all had to say about the flood and the spiritual beings that supposedly interfered with humankind and what the result of that was. I'll just say this is probably one of my favorite episodes so far, so I'm not going to give any more away. Hope you enjoy.
I don't think we've gone in detail of what the Watchers, when I say Watchers, these angels here that are in prison, which 2 Peter, let's look at 2 Peter 2:4.
Yeah, read that one, yeah.
Peter's writing, and he says, "For if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell," which the word there is Tartarus again, "and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment." Where is Peter getting this idea of angels sinning?
Yeah.
You know, if the
What,
Sethite
sinning?
view is true, what the heck is Peter talking about?
Yeah.
Where is he getting this information about angels sinning and being cast down into Tartarus for chains and all this stuff? Like, where's he getting that idea? He's getting it straight from the Book of Enoch.
Yeah, so this
and
is
from
where
Genesis 6.
You know, I mean, I know some people like the Sethite view and they're not going to change their mind.
Sure.
That's cool because you can still follow Jesus and believe that there aren't angels. But there is, I'm just going to say it, there is no context for this being humans in Genesis 6.
None whatsoever, yeah.
And so, like, the what it says in Genesis 6 is the sons of God. Now, that phrase, it doesn't matter what English translation you read it is.
Right.
Because remember we talked about Psalms 82 sometimes says the sons of Israel. Right. And there are other passages where it says Israel instead of God. It says the sons of Israel.
That's a bad translation.
Well, in Genesis 6, it doesn't ever get translated that way. It always gets translated as the sons of God.
B'nai Elohim, yeah.
And so they say, well, that's the descendants of Seth because they're godly. But the sons of God, that phrase never gets used in the Old Testament for humans.
Not for humans, no.
And so I wrote it, in case you guys don't believe me, I wrote it down. Genesis 6, we're already talking about Genesis 6, when it says sons of God saw the daughters of man were attractive, yada, yada, yada. Genesis 6:4, the sons of man came into the daughters of men, they bore children to them, and it's talking about the giants. Deuteronomy 32:8, which Deuteronomy 32 is a huge deal, and we're going to talk about that in a couple weeks.
Yep.
But it says, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance and he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God.
Yep.
That's the one that gets translated Israel sometimes.
Right,
but it's sons of God. So
it's B'nai Elohim.
Then the
Elohim does not mean Israel. Elohim means God or gods, divine persons.
Yep. And then the rest of the references are in Job, Job 1 and 2, when it says that a day came when the sons of God presented themselves. That's obviously not humans.
Right.
He's talking about the divine council. He's talking about divine beings meeting with Yahweh. Job 38, and he says that he talks about creation, and he says the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Well, there weren't humans at creation.
Yeah, before humans.
So anyway, it's not until the New Testament that the sons of God starts to mean humans.
We start to get that title as being grafted, in a sense, like you have this idea of being grafted back or going back to the way things were.
Yeah, because remember it calls Adam the son of God.
Right.
So he's the only human in the Old Testament that got called the son of God.
Right. And it's this idea of going back to Eden.
Right.
Like going back to God's original state of us being in the counsel of God himself.
I believe it's
that group.
Romans 8, right? That says that all creation groans for the day that the sons of God will be revealed.
Right. Yep.
And then using this baptism imagery we just talked about going down and then rising with Christ. We're being converted into sons of God.
That's
We're
a
being
poke in the eye
redeemed
to all the gods right there every time we do that.
We're essentially replacing them.
Yeah, definitely.
They rebelled, and we are taking a place.
We're taking our allegiance with someone else, and that's Yahweh.
Yep.
And think about that terminology, I'm a son of God or I'm a daughter of God. Like, that means a lot more than what you think it means.
Yeah. Well, if you come from a naturalist or materialist background, and you don't look at the deeper meaning, you don't realize that. You just think it's a nice thing to say about people.
Right. And we're not just being adopted back. Like, we're coming full circle.
Yeah, God made Adam.
Like, we're the prodigal,
Yep, exactly.
We're coming back to the Father's house, that we belong in the Father's house.
Yep. It's crazy. That gets into the whole idea of like theosis and sanctification, and I want to do an episode about that so bad because of this idea, because of humans being called sons of God in the New Testament. It's really, really fascinating. Yeah. Also, the historical context, though, and I'll touch this very briefly so that we can talk more about Enoch. But I spent a lot of time in preparation for this episode looking at Sumerian and Babylonian and whatever, all Akkadian and all these other cultures back then.
Right.
They all have flood stories.
This story of, divine beings coming down and mating with human women and producing hybrid races, and, there's a horrible catastrophes that happen, and then a huge flood wipes us all out. Like, that's not just a Bible thing. Yeah. Right?
It's not. It's in all these cultures. And again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but we talked about it last episode. I already said it this episode. The Bible was not created in a bubble.
Right.
And so the Genesis 1 through 11, the creation story, the fall in the garden, the flood, and the Tower of Babel.
Tower of Babel, yeah.
These events, Genesis 1 through 11.
They're all stringed together.
Yeah, and they're all addressing real events.
Yeah.
Like when Moses wrote this, and, again, if you don't believe Moses wrote it, that's okay. But we might not talk about that ever. I don't know. I'm just going to keep saying it that way.
We'll just say Moses.
Moses / whoever you want to insert there. He's writing this as, think about if you saw like a crime committed and you had multiple eyewitnesses, you would ask each of them their story.
Yeah.
And depending on where they're standing, they're going to have something different to say.
Right.
Well, he was wearing this, he pulled this weapon, he ran this way around this corner.
Right.
And the idea is like, okay, well, they all saw something different, but let's figure out the truth in this story.
Right.
And then maybe one person is right and the other people are wrong, right?
Yeah. And then some might have similar stories, and maybe the details are a little different.
Yeah. Think about movies that do that.
Think about if they speak a different language.
Yeah.
Or they're from a different culture, and they're trying to explain something that you both saw.
If one guy's explaining what happened in Spanish and
he
one
might say
guy's speaking
something
English
differently than you, but it's kind of the same thing.
Another example I like, which I've used before, is like when you read the news, if you see Fox and CNN and whoever, all these different news outlets, they might all report on the same story, but highlight different things.
And that they're all fake.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a bad parallel, bad analogy, because there's not really a true.
Right. All the news is fake now. We know that.
Oh man, I heard a pretty good. This is total rabbit trail, but I heard a pretty good line recently. Somebody said the difference between truth and conspiracy is about 6 months.
Exactly. Yeah. Definitely.
Oh, that cracked me up.
Yeah. Conspiracy theorists are just spoilers of real things.
How do you know what's true anymore, right?
Yeah.
But, hopefully you are a mature, educated adult and you see multiple opinions.
Right.
Don't get offended. If we want to understand something, we have to take multiple opinions and
weigh the options.
And somebody's going to be right, eventually, right? The truth is exclusive.
Yeah.
As much as people don't want to believe that.
And that's another thing that we have that we're privileged with. I hate using that word privilege now, but as Christians, we have the spirit of truth in us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when we really submit to him and go with his guidance, he will guide us into all truth.
And that means he shows us truth.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean we have the authority to decide truth.
No.
Because people use that way.
He will steer the boat.
Yeah. We don't get to decide truth. So.
No, we do not.
But anyway, my point is, if you look in history, there are multiple flood stories, and they're just from a different perspective. And when Moses wrote Genesis 1 through 11, it is Israel's perspective, or Moses' perspective.
Right.
A lot of people believe this was revealed to him in the tent of meeting when we talked about God talking to him face to face. They believe God was like, here's what I did. Here's how you guys got here.
Here's my side of the story.
And so Moses is saying, hey, as we travel through Canaan or Egypt or whatever, all these gods, all these stories, you're going to hear all these things, but here's what really happened.
Mm-hmm.
And
they would have heard, we talked about this before, they would have heard probably ad nauseum what the Egyptian myth was.
Yep.
And how that how that creation story went down.
Yeah. It says, so here's a story about Marduk, which is the Babylonian god, right?
Mm-hmm.
It says that in the Epic of Ara,
Mm-hmm.
it says that Marduk banished the Apkallu, which they are called sages or wise men, and it's believed that the Apkallu, that the ancient kings were all partnered with an Apkallu.
Right.
And that the Apkallu taught them how to have civilization.
Right.
Like taught them about laws, taught them about, food and agriculture and, technology, different
Right.
technologies.
So we're bringing this up because, the Bible doesn't give us a whole lot of detail with this
Right.
topic, in
Right.
Genesis 6. But if it's all the same story and other cultures are talking about it, they might not have every single detail right, but if we read all of them, we can kind of get a general
Yeah.
sense of what happened, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the Book of Enoch comes in. It's got a lot of detail. So we can look at all these references and resources of the same events and be
Yeah.
like, okay, this seems to be what was going on at that time.
Yeah, so in this Babylonian story, there's a flood that wipes everybody out.
Right.
And it says that Marduk banishes the Apkallu back to Abzu, A-B-Z-U, and that's the abyss. That is the deep waters. You remember in Genesis 1 where it says the deep?
Yeah.
And there's all these references
the
to
spirit
the deep.
hovering over the deep.
Yeah. Darkness was hovering over the deep, which, okay, I'm going to throw this in now. The deep and the waters in Genesis 1 are two different words.
Oh,
And,
it's not just deep water.
yeah. Well, remember
If
we
it's
said that
deep,
he
dark
said
water.
Yeah, well, it is. I guess that's the
It's really deep and it's
visual
dark.
image.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
connecting
yeah.
the idea of depth,
Right.
Also chaos. We talked about chaos.
Yep.
But the word when it says darkness was hovering over the deep, that word is tahon, and it is a cognate, or it's connected to the word Tiamat. Remember, Tiamat was the goddess of chaos, like the primordial goddess in Babylon.
The dragon. The
that
chaos
Marduk
dragon.
actually killed in their story.
Yeah.
And so in Genesis, it just calls it Tahon. It says the deep. And so they're not saying, oh, it wasn't this powerful goddess. It was just nothing.
Yeah.
And then it says the Holy Spirit was hovering over the waters. The Mayim, I think is the word. And it's the word for like water, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny that it's actually a plural word. In Hebrew, the words like waters, water, heaven, those words are always plural. It's the heavens or the waters.
Right.
It's kind of like scissors. Like in English, we never have a singular form of scissors.
Right.
Right. Or pants.
Yeah.
Okay. So they say the waters.
I wore my pant today.
Yeah. There's reasons for that. There's theories about why they say it that way. But the darkness was over the deep. The Holy Spirit was over the waters. And then when God said, "Let there be light," He separated the light from the darkness. So again, that represents that distinction of
Order.
chaos and order.
Yep.
Okay. So and it's a polemic against Babylon because
Right.
they said, "Oh, Tiamat was this primordial, all-powerful being that
Yeah.
Marduk had to fight."
And here's how he created everything
Yeah,
and
and-
destroyed the chaos dragon.
Yeah, so Moses' version goes, no goddess, no all-powerful being. It was just nothing. And then God said, "Let there be light." And boom, there was light.
Right.
Like, there was no effort involved. So he's saying, our God's better than your God, basically.
So you mentioned these Apkallu.
Yeah, they get
in this
banished
story.
after the flood.
Who are these guys?
They're the sages that they, I just discussed that they were partnered with these kings. And so in the story, Marduk says, "I made those Apkallus," it's a different word here, but it's equivalent to Apkallu, "go down to the Absu, and I said they were not to come back up." And so again, and there's a ton of illustrations of this in all these ancient cultures, but I found that quote, so I wanted to highlight that
Yeah.
that's the Babylonian story.
Now, what did the Apkallu do in the story?
Yeah, so
It's interesting what they do.
they teach men. They represent wisdom,
Yeah.
and they represent like knowledge.
Knowledge.
And
yeah.
so they give this knowledge to the kings.
Didn't we
in
talk
the
about
ancient world.
knowledge in Genesis 3?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like this whole idea of like forbidden knowledge,
Yeah.
the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And here we have divine beings descending to the earth to teach more knowledge
Yeah.
that man was not supposed to have really in the garden.
You know who else has a story like that?
What's that?
The Greeks. right?
Sure, yeah.
Prometheus.
Yeah.
Is that
He
that's
steals-
Greek or Roman?
He steals fire. Yeah, it's Greek.
But he says, I'm going to steal fire from the sun
bring it to the
and
men.
bring it to the humans,
Yep.
and he gets punished for it.
He does. He gets punished.
So that's another theme, is that in a lot of these stories, they actually flip the script, where like Zeus, which it's ironic because Zeus can represent Satan too,
Yeah.
right? And in our heads as Christians,
Right.
but obviously not to them. Zeus was their god.
Mm-hmm.
But he punishes Prometheus for giving them this knowledge. Well, in all these ancient flood stories, the Apkallu, and there's another word, Anunnaki,
Right.
in other cultures, it's the equivalent, I think.
Right.
They give knowledge to humans, and then their god. So, like in the, I believe, Sumerian culture, their god is Enki or Enlil. I get them all mixed up.
Yeah,
My head
there's
was spinning the other night.
There's a lot of cultures with a lot of gods.
But their god,
and a lot of names.
they basically, the high gods say the humans are making too much noise.
Right.
They're just running amok down
They're
there.
annoying.
We're going to wipe them out.
We're going to kill them all.
And so the Apkallu are actually the good guys.
Yeah, they're the good guys.
Because they try to warn humanity.
Right.
And
Yep.
so
And they're the knowledge bringers.
Yeah.
They give us wisdom. They give us the tools necessary to build civilization.
And similar to Prometheus, Prometheus was the underdog. He was the good guy because
Right.
he tried to help
Right.
humanity.
But the Bible, the Christian version of this, tells us they're not good guys.
They are not.
They are not good guys. The plan they had was devious. It could go back to Genesis 3.
Right. The deal was for knowledge.
Right, that and also the seed.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we have this promised
About corrupting the seed.
promised Messiah figure that's going to come and destroy the serpent, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to come through the seed of the woman. And it's just interesting. You could make a logical jump there that the angels were like, well, maybe we can stop that from happening.
Yeah. So here's my thing about that. I like that theory. I'm going to propose something else, though.
Go.
I want to do a whole episode later about demons and evil spirits and
Yeah.
stuff. I think that'd be a blast.
Yeah.
But the idea of the seed, of corrupting the seed, a lot of people that take that approach, I'm not saying it's wrong.
Yeah.
But they try to say that the Watchers, or these sons of God from Genesis 6, are working for the Nakash, the devil.
Yeah, for the serpent.
Because he's like, let's stop God from defeating us, right?
Right.
There's really nowhere that implies that these guys are associated with the devil.
Yeah, it doesn't, yeah.
They could just be, it's kind of like, think about like comic book characters.
Well, it depends
like,
on what you think the Nakash or who you
Yeah.
think the Nakash is.
Yeah,
Because in Enoch, it names a lot of these angels
It does, yeah.
that descend down and they make this covenant between themselves. And Semyaza is kind of the ringleader of them. And he's the one that's like, hey, I ain't going down there by myself. Y'all are going to have to shake hands on it. And, we're going to go in this together.
and it says like 200 of them
200 of these watcher angelic beings
Yep.
descend on Mount Hermon.
Yeah.
And you can look at Mount Hermon on a map right now.
Yeah, it's in the north of Israel.
And you can look at it and go, oh
Which
my
is
gosh.
also where Bashan is. Remember,
Right,
Og of Bashan.
right.
We've mentioned him earlier.
And I think Jesus took a little trip to Mount Hermon,
he did.
at least the base of Mount Hermon, and talked about
He went up.
about the gate of hell.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
gates of hell will not prevail.
Yeah.
And he's standing at the base of Mount Hermon.
Yeah. Crazy parallels.
So
there.
stuff that like
Crazy connections.
you've read about Jesus saying, "Oh, the gates of hell will not prevail against
Yeah.
the church," but when you see where he's at and what happened there, that's where these watcher angels descended
Yeah.
and came through. You could say a gate, and it was held there that like this is the gate into the underworld.
Yeah.
And it was a special place that they would go, and they had shrines and they had temples to Zeus. They had a temple to Pan there
Yeah.
in that area, and that was a gate to the underworld.
Yeah.
And so Jesus is going there saying, hey, you know what?
I'll build my own church.
This is the gate to the underworld. Like, it's not gonna, the
Yeah.
plan that was made
Yeah.
way back then, and this gate that they used to come down on this mountain here, and the whole plan they had, it's not going to prevail.
Yeah. That's the mountain he went up for the transfiguration
Come
too.
on, somebody.
So it was a declaration of war, right?
Like, there is so much more to your Bible.
Yeah, that stuff, man. I didn't even expect you to mention that today. I think
didn't
Mount
either.
Hermon needs to be its
I think
own
it was,
episode.
I think it was inspiration.
Inspiration.
Inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Hallelujah.
Is our podcast inspired?
I would say yes.
Yeah. Hey,
Okay, we are not saying that we are equivalent to the Bible.
No,
but
we do want people, though, to be encouraged in their faith.
Yeah,
and
definitely,
give their
man.
hearts to Christ.
And realize that your Bible is more fantastical than any comic book or any crazy sci-fi movie it's way more fun.
I mean, and I took history
And it's
classes.
real.
I took world history classes in college too, and they would say, well, see, like these stories aren't unique to the Bible. It's like it doesn't have to be.
No,
like people think, well, the Bible's not authentic, so it's not real. But all that means is that all of these people are talking about something that actually happened.
That actually means that it's more real.
Yeah. Yep.
If it was just the Bible talking about this thing, it would be more suspect that it was made up.
It was crazy.
But when it connects to every single culture across the whole world, and we talked about like the pyramids and all the like high place structures all over the world, and it's like it all connects.
Well, I think it was Heiser. Again, that's like the 10th time I've said him on this episode.
I'll just say Alberino one more time.
I think
balance it out.
I think he said it. He was like, why do people think that every how do you say it? Israel or Judaism is the only culture in the world that copied everything.
Yeah,
Like-
exactly. Yeah.
Like you don't, and I guess people take the approach, well, none of it is real, so any of it could be the original or the copy.
Yeah.
But if I believe the Bible's true, I kind of also believe that the Babylonian stories are true, but they're wrong. You know?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It's,
the conclusion
it's
is
kind of
is
just
bad.
opening your mind and saying, like, these are all witnesses to an actual event, and I
Right.
believe the Bible's version of it.
Right,
And now I
exactly.
know what I'm fighting against as a
Exactly.
Christian,
Yep.
Like, when we talk about demons and evil spirits and salvation and sin and all this stuff, this is the frame for it. What happens in Genesis 1 through 11.
Exactly. And
So-
demons are kind of birthed out of this topic, right?
Yeah, these Nephilim, right?
So we're never told in the Bible what demons are, really. I mean, we know
Yeah.
that they're spirits in some sense, and that they're...
Yeah, it calls them unclean spirits.
There's unclean spirits. That's
Jesus
a very
casts
particular...
evil. Yep.
And that they search around for empty places to dwell, and...
Yeah.
Like, there is hardly any mention of a demon-type spirit in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
There might be allusions to, like, evil
Well,
spirits.
the one word
but-
that gets called demon in
the
Deuteronomy
Shadim?
32 is Shadim,
Yeah.
yes, which is from again, it's not a Hebrew word. I think it's a Babylonian word,
Mm-hmm.
and it means a territorial god.
Right.
So remember
right.
Prince of Persia, Prince of Greece.
Exactly, yeah.
Deuteronomy 32, the
Deuteronomy
world was
32,
divided up
yep.
according to the number of sons of God.
Yeah.
So it's not a
Which
Hebrew
gets its
root
root
word.
at Babel.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So the nation of Babylon, the original, the first Babylon, that was that word in Deuteronomy is based on that idea of territorial gods, and it gets translated in English as demons.
Right.
So that's different from what Jesus is
An
casting out
unclean
of people
spirit, yeah.
in the New Testament.
Yeah.
The unclean spirits the Jews believed were the disembodied spirits of these Nephilim.
Right.
Because they're half divine.
Right.
Because they have angel dads and human moms. And so they don't die like normal humans.
Right.
Their bodies die and then their spirits wander.
So just some paraphrasing, just because we can't read it word for word, but get a copy of the Book of Enoch, the first Enoch, the Book of the Watchers.
I mean, I found a PDF of it online.
Yeah.
Like,
It's
I
easy to
skimmed
get
it
to.
in,
They
like,
have apps on
just a few
iPhone
minutes.
and everything. That just like a Bible app, you can get it. So the story is these Watchers come down. What their motivation was, we could talk about. I think it was jealousy over humankind. They wanted wives. They wanted to rule over the earth. So they come down. They mate with the women. The Bible says they have these Nephilim offspring. And we're not really told much else about it. That they existed, that the giants existed on the earth, and then they existed after the flood as well.
Yeah.
So the Book of Enoch is where it really goes into more detail of what these Nephilim offspring are. It says that they were giants, very large. Not like 7-foot basketball players, like really big.
Yeah, like trees.
like the size of cedar trees and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which, in our naturalistic, modern, scientific brains, these days, we easily dismiss. But if you're a Christian, it shouldn't be so hard to accept. Like, we believe in a spiritual world. We believe that Jesus was incarnated as a human. We believe that he was birthed of a virgin. Like,
Yeah.
It doesn't make natural sense.
Yeah, there's
Everything that
some-
we believe doesn't make any natural sense.
Right.
Right? We believe in a triune being of God. Like, that makes no sense, like, naturally. So get it out of your mind that, like, oh, I can't believe this. It's just too fantastic. But it's not really.
Yeah.
So we have these beings, these giant beings. It says that they were hybrids.
Okay, you're talking about Nephilim.
Right?
Yeah,
They
the
were
giants.
So the Watchers are mating with human women.
Yeah.
So the Watchers are divine beings, angels, if you want to call them that. We have human women. They're producing this offspring that are half divine, half human.
Mm-hmm.
We see that in other parts of world mythologies too, don't we?
Yeah, there are giants all over.
Like
I
the
mean,
whole
that's
story of like
nothing.
Hercules, like we had these
Yeah.
demigods,
Yeah.
in Greek mythology and Nordic mythology, and
And you know what else is interesting is that giants, not just like demigods and half breed, half divine beings, but also okay, so here's another fancy word.
Ooh.
We're teaching people all kinds of stuff today.
as well.
Gigantomachy.
Hootie Wuddy?
Yeah. It means war on the giants,
Oh.
right?
From the Old Testament?
Yeah. And so the book of Joshua talks about that.
It says
but
Hootie Maki?
it doesn't. I don't think it uses that word. That's the word for
It's
it.
the scholastic word?
But just like there's a flood story and a creation story in all these different cultures, there are giants
Yep.
in all these other cultures. And like the Greeks, like they had
The Titans.
the Titans, and they had giants, and the Titans and the
Demigods
giants were
and-
different, but they
Right,
fought
right.
against. They had to expel giants.
It's all of
and-
this story, the same
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
So like I don't know, it's just crazy when you see similar threads in all these different cultures, and it's like, well, maybe there's a reason they're all telling the same story.
If
But
you
like
want
a
you
war-
want a movie that's like similar to what your Bible is talking about, watch Wrath of the Titans.
Yeah.
Go watch Wrath of the Titans.
Yep.
And Clash of the Titans, those two films. That's more like what your Bible is talking about.
Yeah.
That's the most biblical movie that you could probably watch, other than The Chosen. Which I never got into those like super Bible movies.
The Chosen's pretty good.
I've heard The Chosen is good.
It's fictional.
Right.
It's based on the Bible, so you have to keep
There
that
was
in
a good
mind.
one actually with Joseph Fiennes in it called Risen. That
Oh.
was actually really good.
Yeah.
Really, really good.
Okay, so what we need to do is maybe give like a book report
Yeah.
of the Book of Enoch. Just
Yeah, we've talked-
Josh and Ryan's book report.
You say report and I flash back to school and that
Yeah.
makes me scared.
Yeah, it was funny in school, like getting into college and understanding the difference in like having to actually critique and analyze material and not just give a book report.
really.
I remember professors being like, "I know what the book says."
You're like, I read the back of the book.
Yeah.
Here's my report.
Yeah, but seriously, so we're not saying everybody needs to go read and study the Book of Enoch. Like, unless you're just a history nerd and you're curious, it's cool.
I would say I would highly recommend.
Yeah,
You don't have to, for sure.
yeah,
But if you really want to, it's like a guide. It's a helpful tool. Kind of like footnotes. You don't have to read footnotes, but
Yeah.
they're pretty helpful.
And we discussed already the period that this was written in, the Second Temple.
Mm-hmm.
It's pre-Jesus, pre-New Testament, so they were all familiar with this book. So
Yep.
it gives some context to the story, and it fleshes out what is only about 7 verses in Genesis chapter 6.
Mm-hmm.
This gives why did the Jews think this was such a big deal?
Yeah.
Well,
Very,
this
very
this
big deal.
writing really kind of expounds on that idea. We're going to start not right at the beginning. We're going to jump around a little bit.
Yeah, so what's really cool is about it, it's almost like a portal.
Oh.
Since Genesis 6 is only kind of like, we have this weird Nephilim thing going on with the Watchers, and, there's like 4 verses. You said 7, in between 4 and 7 verses there. Not a lot
Yeah.
of detail, but the Book of Enoch really like hones in on that story, and it's like a portal. You walk through that portal, and here's what was happening, potentially.
Yeah, so again, Genesis chapter 6 says, when the sons of man began to multiply on the face of the earth, or when men began to multiply, that the sons of God
Yep.
basically lusted after human women and took any ones they wanted as their wives, and even had children with them. And then it makes a jump, and it says that that men were wicked.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting the way the book of Genesis, it kind of skips the whole story and goes, God said, men, because the thoughts of man is wicked from his birth, I'm not going to abide with man forever.
Everything on the earth was corrupted.
So I will say that as we give this little book report again, because, whether you go and read it or not, we're going to tell you what's in the Book of Enoch, or what the gist of this is. But the Jews did not blame the Watchers for humans' sin.
Right.
I've heard, and the Watchers being the angels that rebelled.
Yeah.
We'll explain what Watchers are in just a minute. But it's important to know, I've heard some criticisms of like the flood story, Genesis 6, and writings like the Book of Enoch from Christians and non-Christians saying that the fault here is that it was the Jews' way, like Jewish rabbis' way of kind of passing the buck for man's wickedness. They're blaming all the bad things on these Watchers and on the Nephilim.
Right.
And it's very clear in Genesis that it says that these things happened, but then men were wicked. Right. So God flooded the earth, right?
Yeah, they participated for sure.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the garden scenario. Like, yes, Adam and Eve are responsible for their sin and their choice. Yeah. But we also have this curse on the Nakash, and the dirty deeds he did
there. Yeah,
that laid the groundwork for them to make those decisions. And
he was the variable that kind of set it in motion.
Exactly.
But it was Adam and Eve's decision to rebel.
Right. So you have the same here.
They were punished for their decision. So, Josh, you have it pulled up. Why don't you go ahead and just read that?
and kind of like what you were saying, like the Bible kind of focuses on like the humanity part of the problem, but the Book of Enoch really goes into like the spiritual and like the Watchers, the sons of God, the Nephilim part of the story. Yeah, it's interesting. So we are using the Book of Enoch iOS app because I think it's a little bit easier to navigate. There's different versions of the Book of Enoch online that some of the verses and numbers and stuff
it's
are
just
kinda,
like the Bible.
Right. There's different versions, and the verses and stuff are kind of different sometimes. But we're using the iOS app. It's just called Book of Enoch. In that app, we're looking at chapter 7. It's called section 2. This is the Book of the Watchers. And the first verse there is piggybacking off of Genesis 6. So it's picking up the story where we left off, and it says, "It happened after the sons of men had multiplied in those days that daughters were born to them, elegant and beautiful." So we see that it really like gives detail of like, okay, women were gorgeous. Of course, women are gorgeous. They're great. But it really says that, I think, for a reason. Because in verse 2, and even in Genesis 6, it says that the sons of God looked at the daughters of men and were like, we want that. We want that for us. Man has that. Why don't we have that? Which I think was the problem. But verse 2, it says here in the Book of Enoch, "And when the angels, the sons of heaven, beheld them, they became enamored with them. And they said to each other, 'Come and let us select for ourselves wives from the progeny of men, and let us beget children.'" So here we see their plan starting to hatch. They're looking down on God's creation. They're set, in this place in a heavenly realm.
Yeah.
They have job descriptions, which the Book of Enoch mentions.
Yeah. And I really, we need to do an episode on, I guess, maybe marriage roles and relationships and stuff in the future, because that's one thing that I see in the Genesis 6 story and in Enoch and it gets highlighted in the Bible. We mentioned it earlier that Jesus said the angels in heaven are not given in marriage.
They don't marry.
So it's like marriage is for a specific purpose. Having children is for
humanity.
Yeah. Adam and Eve are supposed to multiply and fill the earth.
Exactly.
And so here you have Watchers, angels, saying, why don't we go do that? We can have we can have our own dominion, our own domain.
Exactly.
If we have our own sons.
Right.
Where they had their own job they were supposed to fulfill, kind of monitoring. In fact, the Book of Enoch starts out.
Right. Was it chapter 1 or chapter 2?
So on this app that we're
chapter
using,
3.
On this app that we're using, it starts in chapter 3.
Okay.
And it says
kind of gives their job descriptions, huh?
It's really interesting the way it starts out. It says, "All who are in the heavens know what is transacted there." It's very ominous.
Yeah.
But it says that the heavenly luminaries do not change their path, that each one rises and sets regularly. It goes on to talk about the seasons, like trees bearing fruit, summer heat, winter cold.
So it seems like all the constants of like Earth and
it's
the
like
universe.
these patterns,
all these things that go.
So we kind of get this image like man. Remember, Adam was meant to steward the earth. He was put in the garden, and his job was to keep the garden and then multiply and subdue the earth. Right.
Right.
Well, here we kind of see that the Jewish belief, or I guess you could say like the ancient Near East or whatever, their belief about the heavenly beings was that they were supposed to kind of monitor just creation.
Yeah.
And you even see that in cultures we've mentioned several times.
I was about to say, that's in all the ancient religions. The
reason the sun goes up and down is because a god is carrying that.
Because Horus, the Egyptian god of the sun, he's controlling that. Set is the ruler of the underworld in the nighttime. And, it's all...
You get that in... Bro, even J.R.R. Tolkien says that in the Silmarillion, that the sun and moon were fruit from a tree that people had to like walk back and forth.
Funny little alien footnote here. If you've ever watched the episode of Ancient Aliens where it talks about Christian iconography and Christian artwork, where they say, hey, like there's UFOs in like ancient, Christian paintings and stuff, and they'll show you these paintings of like what looks like supposed to be like seasonal things in paintings, like a moon and a sun, but inside of the sun, what looks like the spherical like structure of the sun and the moon, there's like a little man, like sitting inside of there, and they're like, "See, that's a spaceship," and it's but it's like no, it's the idea of they're personifying things like the moon and the sun and the stars and the times and seasons. They're putting a divine personage to that thing, and that's where this comes from.
Exactly. So you can just see that all over in religions and traditions and
so
stuff.
It's not
ancient
a
cultures.
spaceship.
It's this idea that the reason these patterns happen in nature, the sun, the moon, the leaves falling off the trees, and snow and rain, and like the reason all these things happen regularly is because something is keeping up with that.
Yeah.
And so like there's kind of the idea that was the angel's job.
Right.
And we mentioned virtues. Like if you have ever studied like classes of angels, people believe there's a group of angels. I say people, but there is a class of angels called virtues, and they were over nature. And so, maybe that's similar to what the watchers are in the Book of Enoch. But yeah, early in the Book of Enoch, it starts out by saying, consider the heavenly bodies, consider this, and then he gets into the sons of God descending.
Right.
And remember, Jude says they left their proper abode. They left their appointed place.
Yep.
So yeah, it's almost like they abandoned their job to go and have kids on earth.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to do something else.
Alberino, Timothy Alberino, I go along with what he says on this, and he thinks the whole thing was that they were jealous of humanity.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Nakash was, saying, I'm going to set up my throne,
above the
stars of heaven and all that. The kind of the same scenario here. They're looking down and they're seeing, okay, man is given dominion over his own planet. He's given a helpmate, that's suitable for him, and they're going to have children, and they're going to have this legacy and a destiny, and the angels are looking down and going, why does he get to have all that? We're up here in the presence of God, literally, and he's down there and he gets his own stuff and dominion. And
it really is interesting. I want to hold the whole like marriage and childbearing topic for later, because we could spend forever talking about that. But like, it is interesting how much in modern culture that is being attacked, the traditional view of marriage and
there's
stuff.
A reason, huh?
And it's almost like you don't think of marriage as a tool, as a utility that God created for man to fulfill his purpose. The way Adam and Eve were going to fulfill their purpose was by multiplying and then subduing the earth.
When you see culture attacking family, attacking traditional marriage, that's an attack on the plan of God.
Yeah.
It's a direct assault against what God desires.
The reason marriage is so important, the reason the role of men and the role of women is so important is because God made us to work that way to fulfill a purpose.
Right.
And so the angels, again, they're saying like, apparently humans get to have kids and have dominion over the earth. Why why can't we do that?
Yeah, I don't want to guide the moon and
Yeah.
stars.
Yeah, they're like, there's no hot angel women up here. Let's go. Let's go have our own kingdoms on earth.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, but I think it's funny how it just says, in verse 2 there of Enoch, they were enamored with the women.
yeah,
And they were like, we want that. And I don't think it was just a sexual thing. I think that was part of it.
it's a power thing.
It was a power and dominion thing
Yeah.
because they don't have dominion on the earth. Only Adam does.
They technically, I think that the story here, the plot is that they don't have dominion over anything. They're
Not really.
servants.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So they're servants of the Most High, the
So
sons
it's a
of God.
power grab.
So they're saying, I'm going to make my own kingdom. I'm going to go to earth and have
Right.
my own kids.
And how do they do that? Because only humans have dominion rightfully
Yeah.
on the earth.
Yep.
So I think they devised this idea, and this can get into conspiracy stuff that's pretty fun, that actually leaks into modern day. The progeny, our Nephilim sons, are going to be human enough.
Yeah.
They could claim that dominion on this
That's
earth.
Timothy Alberino's birthright.
Definitely.
thing,
Yeah. If
That
you want to
men
study
by-
about this stuff more, check out Timothy Alberino's Birthright.
Yeah.
It's a book and it's also a series on YouTube, but
Yeah.
it makes so much sense though to me. Like they can't rightfully take dominion from humanity because it's given to humans,
Yeah.
It's a God-given thing. That image of God. It can't be taken.
Yeah, so if you manage to have hybrid children,
Yeah,
because
so-
they are human,
Because they
would
technically
have
are
authority
human.
on earth.
Exactly.
And think about, so this is a really interesting comparison to Jesus, because
Exactly.
Jesus' mother was a virgin.
Exactly.
So he was totally human, but he was totally divine.
Exactly.
And because he was divine, he had authority in the heavens.
He had authority in
and
heaven
because he's a man,
and on earth.
he had authority on earth.
Dude, it's killer when you really understand.
But he wasn't a mixture. Like he
No,
wasn't impure
right,
like
he
these
was pure,
were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you really understand the incarnation and what scholars call the hypostatic union.
Right.
That's divine and human together in a pure way that Jesus
Yeah.
only Jesus was.
And think about this. So Heiser points this out. We've discussed types before, but if you say that something is a type of something else, it's
Yeah.
what it is a foreshadowing. It's an
yeah.
image that represents something that's going to happen in the future.
Right, right.
So, like for instance, you'll hear that Moses is a type for Jesus,
Right.
Because he represents the high priest and he leads people out of exile,
slavery,
out of
yep,
slavery.
yep.
Okay, so Heiser points out, we just made this comparison that Jesus was 100% divine and 100% human. God did not have any kind of sexual relation
Right,
with Mary.
right.
Mary was a virgin. So it's he's not mixture. He's not some kind of half-breed
Right.
like the Nephilim are, right?
Exactly.
Nephilim are part
Exactly.
divine and part human.
Right.
But Heiser points out that all the types for Christ in the Old Testament, Moses, Joshua, David, they all fought giants in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that imagery.
Yeah.
Because it shows that Jesus is the solution to this unholy mixture.
Right.
Right? And so the giants were what and the wickedness in the promised land, they were corrupting the promised land, and God said, you cannot live among the Canaanites. You can't live among these people.
Right.
You have to totally wipe them
Now,
out.
I don't know if anybody or if everybody understands like the clans and the people groups in the Old Testament that God is always telling Israel to go and fight and take over their land and
Right.
execute
The
them, and
Hittites,
like it gets
the
very
Amalekites,
crazy. These are giant clans.
Right.
These aren't just random people.
Yep.
These are strategically like people that God is wanting his people to go and eradicate for a certain reason because they are descendants of what we're about to talk about right here in the Nephilim.
Also, that's another thing people criticize about the Bible is that it's genocide or that it's racist.
Right, yeah.
But these were not race wars in the Old Testament.
Right.
You were identified by your religion or your cult or your community or whatever.
Yeah.
And so the groups that Joshua and Moses and the Israelites had to wipe out were pagan religious groups. They were giant clans.
Yeah.
It wasn't a race war. It had nothing to do with
Right.
ethnicity or skin color or language or any of that.
Right.
These people were practicing rituals that made them unclean, and God said, you can't live among them.
Right.
And think about the laws like Don't plant two different kinds of seed in the same field. Don't have two different kinds of cloth in your, or what is it like?
Two
in your
different
clothes.
kind of things woven together.
You can't mix two different kinds of fabric. There's all kinds of laws in the Old Testament that seem crazy and ridiculous to us now, because like I'm probably wearing a 50-50 cotton jacket right now, but like God did all these things to show I don't accept mixture.
Right.
Like things have to be pure, right? So I find the whole, we're going to get more into giants later. We're going to talk about the Tower of Babel, because Genesis 6 says there were Nephilim in those days and afterwards. So we have to address how were there giants after the flood.
Yeah.
So when we get to the Tower of Babel, and we'll probably talk about Joshua and Moses and all them later. But anyway, that's just a little preview. Like you can find the gospel in these things. Jesus is the answer.
Oh, very much. When modern Christians say the word gospel, like
it's very watered down.
Yes, it's like, yes, it is Jesus coming. Yes, it is his death and resurrection. Yes, it's all of that. But it's so much more, and it's so much more powerful when you see the whole picture.
Yeah.
Like I don't even think we'll ever see the whole picture. Like we see some of it, and Paul talks about seeing in a glass darkly, but when we're in heaven, we'll hopefully get the whole picture. But dude, it's so much more than like Jesus died on the cross for your sins. Like, yes, it is that, but man, he is redeeming all of the creation and everything that has been, polluted and distorted and, from all different sides, he's mending all of it.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. And this is part of it.
Yeah, man.
So we have these angels descend down. So, what was in their hearts, we don't exactly know, but I think the text is kind of it. They were enamored with the idea of we want what humanity has, and we're going to go down there and we're going to take it. And we got to do it in a certain way that, we're not, how would you say, like, we're going to do it in a shady way, not like just outright war.
Well, they're taking advantage of a system that God created.
Exactly, yeah.
They're acting out of order.
And here's what's interesting. I don't know if you ever thought about this, Ryan, but the fact that they were able to produce offspring is interesting. It's like God set the plans in place for a male and a female to procreate. It was also with the animal kingdom, and evidently it's also in the with angels.
Yeah.
So it's like it's not an impossible. It's like he made the recipe, and like anybody could take the recipe.
Well, we said this. I think at the very beginning of this recording, I think we said there's no biologists. Like who would know?
Yeah.
People are like, well, angels can't procreate with humans.
Yes,
like,
they can.
I don't know why not. I guess
really.
we just assumed that, but
right.
It's a little uncomfortable to think about. But yeah,
Right.
like there's no rule
It's crazy,
that I
bro.
know of that they can't.
It's crazy.
So back to the book report, Josh.
Yes.
After they saw the daughters of men and they wanted to have children, something very interesting happens. Mm-hmm. This is not the first divine transgression, right? In the Garden of Eden, the serpent rebelled, and we saw what happened to him. So these guys, they kind of take an extra step here.
Yeah, I think maybe, and there's speculation on okay, did the Nakash, the Satan figure, is he directing these angels, or were they inspired by what he did? And there's a lot of speculation there. Were they independent? Were they in cahoots? But there's this one angel here in verse 3 of Enoch 7. It says, then their leader. So they had a leader.
Yeah.
They had somebody who was leading them, and they name him Semyaza. This is kind of the ringleader of these watcher angels, which later talks about 200 of them. Yeah. So then their leader, Semyaza, said to them, so he's talking to the other watchers, I fear that you may perhaps be indisposed to the performance of this enterprise.
You're going to chicken out.
Very legal terminology there.
This is using King James language.
I'm scared that, you guys are going to chicken out and I'm going to be left with the tab. And then verse 4, he says, and that I alone shall suffer for such a grievous crime. So they knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah.
They knew it was going to be a universal cosmic crime, to go in there and tinker with what God has created. But they answered to him and said, we all swear, and we're going to bind ourselves mutually with an oath, really, or execrations is what it says. But
King James language.
They're going to promise themselves, hey, we're all going to go in on this. that we will not change our intention but execute our projected undertaking. We're all going to do this together. We're all going to promise not to chicken out.
Yeah, do you think they thought there was like a safety in numbers thing?
I don't know, man.
He can't catch us
They're
all.
like, yeah, I guess like they're like, look, if we're all going down, we're going down together. Mm-hmm. So then they all swore together and bound themselves by mutual oath. Their whole number was 200, and it says that they descended upon Ardis. So Ardis, we'll talk about that, which is at the top of Armon. So yeah. So scholars will talk about it's Mount Hermon.
Yeah.
And that's the Mount Hermon in biblical times, and that mountain is still there today.
Yep.
And there's a ski resort on top of Mount Hermon.
You can go skiing down Mount Hermon.
If you want to ski where the Watchers
There's probably
descended.
a Black Diamond Trail called Watchers, Path of the Watchers.
Oh man.
But yeah, seriously, we're going to spend an episode probably talking about Mount Hermon because it occurs several times in the Bible.
Yeah.
It's even the position, you can find it on a map, and the position of it is important, the way that it's talked about in literature and in the Bible.
Yep.
And so we're going to get into that probably in the next episode.
Right.
But yeah, they came down on Mount Hermon. Mm-hmm. It goes on to name the chiefs. There's 200 of them, but it names a few of the chief ones. It says they took wives, and the women that conceived had giants whose stature was 300 cubits, which that number is interesting because I think the Noah's Ark was 300 cubits, right?
They're very large.
So that's a symbolic number there.
And so that's where I think
they're huge too. They're not like
right.
Like people say Goliath was like 7 or 8 feet tall, right?
Yeah, between 7 and 9.
And they would have still, even if he was only 7 feet tall, he would have been a giant because the average height back then for someone in the Near East was
supposedly
like 5 or 6.
But that's more after flood, like pre-flood.
Yeah.
There's a lot of debate on how big humans were.
Yeah.
And you can look at,
write that down. Another topic
there's
for
so
later.
much so one guy you can look up on some of those topics is Rob Skiba. He passed away recently, but him and like Judd Burton were good friends. But yeah, Rob Skiba's got some interesting speculations on some of that stuff, the antediluvian world.
Yeah, so the way that chapter 7 ends is very important. Again, this is like story time with the Book of Enoch. It says, the men devoured all the labor of men produced until it became impossible to feed them, and then they turned themselves against men in order to devour them, and began to injure beasts, or you could say defile or corrupt birds, beasts, reptiles, fish, to eat their flesh one after another, and to drink their blood.
Right.
And again, it sounds gruesome and unnecessary, but these things are in there for a reason that we'll get to later.
Let's look at that really quick.
Yep.
So Watchers come down Mount Hermon. They make an exchange of information. Like, we're going to give you all the stuff. It actually says what men were striving to learn. They were striving to learn these things, and the Watchers come down and make a transaction and say, hey, we'll tell you, we're going to give you all this information that you've been looking for, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. And you give us your women. So they didn't come down and like grab women and take off with them and start, they made an exchange. It was almost like, we'll try to do this as legal as possible. We'll make an exchange. We'll give you the info. You give us the women. We'll take them. We have our sons now.
Yeah, we'll make a deal.
The Nephilim come out. They're giant, enormous, beings that are half divine, half human. And it says that they... And I think it was like a scenario of like somebody that has like gigantism, like they're like a normal baby.
They probably start out normal size.
Yeah, they're like a
just
normal
grow
baby, and then they like their body doesn't know when to slow down the growth period, so they just get bigger and bigger. But then they start like being insatiable, right? So they can't feed them.
Huge.
I mean, they're huge. 300 cubits. You can look that up. That's very big, like the size of a building. They're like enormous.
Yeah.
And like I said in the last episode, we think fairy tale when we think of this stuff, but this stuff really happened. Like, if you're going to be a Christian, you're going to like Goliath was real. Like all this stuff is real. Like, if you really believe it. So it's just interesting. Like, there's so many like conspiracy theories that go off of this that make so much sense. That they started devouring each other. They started devouring people, and they started drinking blood. A lot of scholars will say this is where human sacrifice was kind of entered into pagan religions.
Yeah, they
Because these Nephilim were viewed as gods. Here's the Watchers coming out of heaven saying, we're going to take your women, we're going to give you all this knowledge for civilization and, the mysteries of heaven. Our offspring are going to rule over you.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I have two thoughts now on what you just said. So we already saw in Genesis 3 the idea of an exchange or like a barter.
Yep.
The serpent said, hey, if you eat this fruit, you're going to be wise like us.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a, hey, do what I said instead of what God said, and you can be wise. And they fell for it, right?
Right.
So we're seeing the same thing here. They're making a deal.
Yeah.
And remember Jesus, when he was tempted in the wilderness, the devil tried to make a deal with him too. If you just worship me, I can give you all this,
I'll give you all these kingdoms.
So this is a recurring theme, this idea of forbidden.
How was Satan able to say that?
Yeah.
How was he able to say, hey, Jesus, I'll give you all these kingdoms if he didn't have them?
Yeah.
And I think this is where it shows where he got that authority from.
Yeah.
Where he got that influence and dominion. Not the dominion that we have legally. So here are these Nephilim, they're half divine, half human. And I think what's happening here is the Watchers are saying, look, we have the divine, our offspring has the divine right as divine beings and human to rule this place.
Yeah.
Like, we have the power, we have the authority, you're going to worship them.
Well, and that's the second thought I was going to say, is that Genesis 6 uses the word Gibor, mighty man.
Right.
It says that these are the mighty men of old.
Right.
And I think some translations say heroes, or mighty
warriors,
warriors.
Yeah.
But the modern day idea of a hero is like, Superman, Spider-Man, like they're the good guys, they save the city. But in ancient cultures and ancient literature, hero had a little bit of a different, it just meant a mighty man. Like Hercules, we know as a hero because he was a demigod. He fought the Hydra and like all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But he also like killed his own children and stuff. Like he was not a good guy.
Yeah.
So the idea of a hero, what in this context, what we're talking about, a hero is just a mighty man.
Right.
It doesn't mean a good guy.
Right.
And so that word Gibor, mighty man, gets used again later for Nimrod.
Yeah, for Nimrod, yeah.
It gets used later for Nimrod.
And I think it's
and you
this
see kind of the
idea-
same thing happen.
Right, I think it's the idea what you brought up about like modern day superheroes.
Yeah.
Like we think of there's bad superheroes
Yeah.
that have a lot of power. They have this divine power in a sense, but they're also like us, kind of,
Yeah.
Like the whole idea of Superman is like he's this descended alien from another planet that has come to Earth, that has divine power, but yet he blends in among us like a human. It's like this whole...
that's basically all superheroes, especially
Exactly,
DC.
yeah.
Wonder Woman,
right.
Aquaman.
Well, it all comes from the Bible.
Yeah, it's
Like,
all based on...
It's all based on like
Hey, man.
Jesus, like really. But but I really want to hit home this idea of like they're the God kings,
Right.
and they're the ones that God is telling Israel to overthrow, their lineage that is oppressive to humanity. And like I said, where it talks about them killing each other and drinking blood and all this stuff, a lot of scholars would say, this could be potentially where human sacrifice comes into the human stage here.
Yeah, because they were trying to satisfy these
They were trying
God
to
kings.
satisfy the God kings that were ruling over them. So it makes so much sense. Like, dude, I just love this stuff. Like, it just makes our world make so much sense.
Yeah. Well, again, we've been talking again about those three dichotomies, those themes that we've been talking about. But chaos, like the idea of chaos and evil in the world, we water down the gospel to just the forgiveness of our own sins and being grafted into God's family.
Yeah.
And it's really about, like we've said, it's not just forgiving our sins, it's restoring mankind to the original design. It's back to Adam, back to Eden.
Right. And there were so many deviations off of that plan.
Yeah, and so the Jews, the reason that we keep talking about the three falls, the Genesis 3, the Garden of Eden, and then the flood in Genesis 6, and then Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. The Jewish belief was that the Messiah that was coming was going to fix not just Adam and Eve.
Right.
He was going to fix all of these
He had
problems.
to fix all three.
And so you see, spoiler alert, but
Yeah.
you see that, again, we talked about the types of Christ fighting giants and that Jesus was a God-man that reconciled the nations. So then you see Genesis 11 and the book of Acts,
Right.
the Holy Spirit and all that. So he reconciles the
Babel,
nations.
and all that stuff.
Yeah, so like he defeats the powers of darkness, he redeems us from death, and he brings the world back into order, you know?
Right.
So he solves all three of these problems.
And just a footnote, you said like Babel and Acts, like,
yeah.
so at Babel, their languages are confused,
Right.
right? And they're scattered. In Acts, what happens? The Spirit of God descends, languages are spoken, but everybody is together in on it, and it brings people together.
Yeah, they can all understand in their own languages.
So it's a fixing of the problem.
Yeah, and the Book of Acts makes a point. Every time a group of people or somebody gets saved, Luke, the author, writes where they were from. And but that's for the Genesis 11 episode.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
But anyway, the point is like what we just said multiple times already is that, you know, we don't want the gospel to just be watered down to a self-centered, like, oh, I feel guilty because I did something bad and
Right.
Jesus makes me feel better.
Right.
It's really God is restoring all of creation, humans and the world and everything,
Right.
back to Eden. He's trying to reconcile it back to himself.
Right.
Now, some people are going to listen to that and take it to the extreme and think like, well, maybe the devil will get saved. We're not saying that.
Right.
Like,
No. Well,
there are some things that will not be.
I was just going to say, like,
Yeah.
and he's going to administer justice.
Yeah,
He's going to administer justice and wrath to those
part
that
of
deserve
reconciliation
it. Right. Yeah.
is justice.
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
And it says that we're going to rejoice in all of that, which
Yeah.
sounds harsh, you know, but that's that's another part of like God's character that's overlooked a lot. Like, yes, people have taken that idea of wrath and justice and like all this stuff, and they've turned it into something scary.
Yeah,
and
God is this
awful
bad guy.
Yeah,
He
he's
hates-
just mad at everyone. Well, in his wrath and in his justice, we can worship him and like look at that side of his character and say that's right. You know,
Yeah.
just like you would take somebody who's a murderer and you lock them up for the rest of their life. Like, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's not good that somebody did that or that we have to lock somebody away or, you know, maybe have the death penalty or whatever. It's not good.
But in order to reconcile,
But
there
in
has
order
to
to
be.
have justice,
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
So I know we've mentioned that a couple times, but I just wanted to bring that up again because you may listen to this and say, why are we spending so much time talking about this book that isn't in the Bible and these like fantasy giants and killing eating humans and drinking blood and all this
the
stuff?
Federal Reserve.
And it's I think I said it in the I think I said it in the first episode, but you know, we talked about having a self-centered Christianity versus a Christ-centered Christianity.
Exactly.
And you have to realize that like the Jewish belief that we inherited as Christians, that Paul lived with and
Right.
Jude and John and all these guys,
Right.
what they thought was that Jesus, when he died and ascended, he descended, which is, we're going to get that in the Book of Enoch. And then when he ascended into heaven, he fixed all of these problems.
Right.
It's not just for us.
Right.
And that's why I feel like Christianity is not just you know, how does this apply to me? How does this make me feel better? How can I be a better person? It's not for me and about me. It's I'm part of this huge story that's been going on for
And I think that's
millennia.
why, like, when you understand this and when you finally see it, that's why it can get kind of aggravating when you sit in a modern church service and you're hearing about, you know, whatever the 3-step plan is to make my finances better. It's like, dude, like,
you're getting the latest John Maxwell, how to be a productive person.
right, you know, and
Bible.
not that those things are bad
you know,
or evil or they shouldn't be there, like, but when you see behind the curtain, you know, it's like, dude, there's so much more than like.
And I'll just say, like, all of that stuff about how to have a good family and how to
that's
have order in your life,
necessary,
you
yeah.
need that. You do need that kind
Definitely.
of teaching. But
It's practical.
man, what I don't hear many celebrity preachers talking about now is the Great Commission. Go win souls and make disciples.
Yeah.
I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth, therefore go. What Jesus is saying he's basically saying, I've restored order. I have all authority because he was God and man.
Exactly.
And so this is what he's talking about. He defeated these guys.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and so I showed you a few days ago. Al Marino was talking at the Birthright Conference, and he was talking about in the Book of Revelation where John is, you know, he's having this vision, and one of the angels hands him the scroll, and it's this scroll. What Al Marino says is the deed to the earth. And he's like, who is worthy to open this scroll, you know?
Yeah.
And it says that John wept, you know, go read it. And it says that he wept bitterly. And he was like, why is he weeping over this scroll, you know? And it's like, because nobody was found worthy to open it other than Jesus.
Yeah.
The Lamb.
Yeah.
He was the fix for all of it.
Yeah.
He was divine. He was also human who sits on a throne as a man. Like, we forget that like Jesus ascended back into heaven in his like human form.
Yeah.
Like as a man. Like
Yeah.
he is a man today. And that's the whole idea of a mediator between God and man, is that he is still a man, a divine man,
Right.
the divine
He
man.
represents us.
And he
Yeah.
connects both realms back together perfectly.
Yep.
He's the one that's worthy to open the scroll.
When I started studying this stuff, it sounded crazy at first, and then I was like, but you know what? The gospel, like the Great Commission, go into all the world, win souls, and make disciples. That makes so much more sense. Like, a lot of people, I think of that as like a sales pitch, like, oh, your life will be better if
Right.
you become a Christian
Yeah,
like me.
it's so not that
and
at
you,
all.
And you learn all these ways to share the gospel and debate and, apologetics and stuff. And people think like, this is a sales pitch. I have to convince
can I
this
win
person
them
to be a
over?
Christian.
Yeah.
But really, it's Jesus is reconciling us all back to him. And so the Great Commission, I was more fired up for that, like after studying this stuff, because I realized like, I am a messenger now.
Yeah.
You go into all the world and tell them like, hey, we have been accepted back. Jesus has made a way for us to
Right.
be brought back to the
Yes.
family of God.
Yeah.
Like he's the answer to all these problems, and it just kind of moves it past that like, oh, I wear this brand of clothes and I go to this church. Like
Yeah.
that, a lot of people, your Christianity or your religion is just something you put on your resume almost.
right.
And it's like, no, this should be your paradigm. This should be your worldview, that like Yahweh is God.
Right.
Jesus made a way for us to come back to Yahweh, to himself.
Right.
And
it's
that's why we
also-
have to win souls and make disciples, because
it's also-
everybody should be coming back.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you say coming back too, it's also this proclamation of the gods have been overruled.
Yeah.
Like, he has taken all the authority in heaven
Yeah.
and on earth. So you have this idea, in Deuteronomy 32 where, the nations are split up and given
Yeah.
over to all these other gods, and the gods enslave them,
Yeah.
and they're like, human sacrifice, we're going to continue, what the Nephilim started and what the Watchers started, and it's this enslavement. And you get into all this stuff like Dr. Laura Sanger gets into it, it's just incredible. But,
Yeah.
That's another. Even Paul does this at the Areopagus. He goes and he's like, I see all these gods that you're worshiping. You don't have to worship them anymore.
Yeah.
Like, you're not enslaved to them anymore. You've been freed.
Yep.
You're free to now worship Yahweh.
Well, and that's a perspective too, that like if you think of it as like a sales pitch, Paul was trying to convince them to give up their way of life and become a Christian. They thought back then, and there's writings from Plato that show this, that like
We're
thought that,
supposed to worship this God,
yeah,
though.
I live here in Athens.
Right.
I'm supposed to worship this God.
And they were right to a
Yeah.
certain extent.
And Paul
Like,
said, no, you're allowed to worship a different God
You're
now.
free
In
now.
fact, he's inviting you to come back.
Exactly.
So Paul, it wasn't just saying like abandon your gods. He was almost saying you have permission to leave.
exactly.
Like you leave the kingdom of darkness and join the kingdom of
And
light.
it's this whole idea, just like we always think of the Egyptian Exodus as being like, oh, it's this freedom from slavery. And that's exactly what it is, but it's the same here. That's what the gospel is.
Yep.
It's freedom from the slavery of the other
Yep.
gods that God were judging the nations with.
Yeah, man.
Dude, I'm telling you, bro, it is a rabbit hole that never ends, and it's so good.
Yeah, man. I almost feel like we should just end the episode right here,
hallelujah.
bro. If you feel like I'm all fired up over this now. We didn't talk about the divine, what deal they made, what knowledge did the humans get.
Maybe we can talk about that next episode.
Yeah, we can do that. We can pause our book report for now. I feel like that's a good note to end
Yeah,
on.
it's really good. Praise the Lord.
And we got some spoilers for our Genesis 11 and the nations topic. So
The ziggurats.
y'all have that to look forward to now. You kind of know what we're going to talk about with
Portals
Genesis 11.
and ziggurats and aliens coming down on mountains.
Yeah, man.
So this has been a really good discussion, I think. It should ignite your curiosity into the Book of Enoch and into the curiosity of like things that are not so talked about in the open in church or, your university or Bible
Yeah.
college, or some of these things just are not looked at the way they should be.
Yeah, we're not trying to deviate from the biblical story, the gospel. We're not
Not
trying
at
to
all.
draw people away from it. We're showing you like
There's a lot of footnotes.
there's a reason we're looking into these extra biblical things, these ancient cultures.
Because we love the Bible, and because we love the gospel.
It really makes it more sense, but that's the ancient context that
Exactly.
that the Bible was written in. So
Well, let's get together next week and do it again.
oh yeah, I'll be here. Looking at you, audience. Hopefully you're here. Join us on Instagram at behindthecurtainpc.
Yep.
Send us messages if you have questions or comments. You can also email us at behindthecurtainpc@gmail.com. Please share with your friends
Yep.
and people that you think need to
Coworkers,
hear
family,
this.
people in your church. You
Give
know,
us
if
a review.
If you know, like, hey, that guy at church, he really loves to like dig into the
Yeah.
Bible, or that lady, like, share it with them.
Yeah,
They'll
well, and
probably enjoy
again, people's criticisms to Christianity just seem so shallow when you get into some of these things.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
my whole paradigm is different on this stuff now. You know, the worldview, people's worldviews are messed up. You know.
Yep.
So anyway, we'll finish the Book of Enoch we won't finish the Book of Enoch. We have a few more parts that we're gonna
We'll
highlight.
get back into it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about Mount Hermon, and then we'll see what happens after that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Thanks for joining us.
thanks for joining us.
See ya.